Michelle, I really want to thank you for the introduction and the time. It was really fortuitous to be sitting here and have Brian and Tyler available to talk about the subject. We're sitting here working on some sites, looking at some different things, and the subject of 222I came up. It's a consensus standard, the ANSI TIA 222. But Brian, it actually has a relationship with the International Building Code, and I think that's one of the things we were discussing and thought would be of merit to some of the folks in the audience.
That's right. It's going back to Rev F. The 222 has been referenced in the International Building Code. So as a result of that, each successive release of 222, whether it be Rev G, Rev H, and now Rev I, are all accepted by the International Building Code, which becomes important because it becomes a legally binding standard. It's not just a standard, which is what TA releases it as. It actually effectively becomes code as a result of being in the International Building Code.
So there's a bar that has to be met by anyone in an authority having jurisdiction that's under IBC. When they sign for a permit saying they're complying, they're really attesting to meet the requirements of 222I, aren't they?
That is correct. They're meeting the requirements of 222, and then by default, the expectations of the reliability of the International Building Code.
That's wonderful. I think that's going to help you a lot, Tyler, because now you can work with your people that do zoning, permitting, everything else, and the understanding of why we point them to 222 when it has to do with the telecommunication structure, because that's its intended use, and that's what the International Building Code is recognizing. But I think the thing we were really debating was, why I? Why do we keep going from A to B to C to D to E to F to G to H, and now we're in I, and oh my gosh, they're talking about another one.
Well, we haven't really started Rev J yet, but the short answer is Rev A first came out in 1960, so we've got a long history here. But it is fair. Rev I is about 6 years from Rev H to Rev I. That's about that's about half the time we normally do. The main reason for it is we saw issues in the industry that we wanted to address. We also want to remain current with the American Society of Civil Engineers standards we reference, as well as the American Institute of Steel Construction standards we reference. Consistency with those standards maintains consistency with the International Building Code, which should make a more harmonious relationship between the standards, permitting, and engineering.
And Tyler, I think that went to the question you started the whole conversation with is, how do I know what good is on a tower? Can you speak to what the NCTIA 222 standard means to you?
Yeah, I mean, the 222 standard, it really helps our maintenance condition assessment program. We utilize that as our baseline, as we've discussed in other videos. And, we want to make sure that our structures are safe, that the systems act the way they're supposed to, and to make sure that everything has the life cycle as expected. And so utilizing the TIA 222 and making sure that, as we understand different things that happen throughout the industry, that we continue to improve. And I believe that's what this is doing right now. We continue to improve and uplift the industry by making revisions as we continue to learn. And so it makes me as a tower owner feel really, really comfortable. It helps me sleep better at night when I know that we continue to gather information and continue to make revisions so that we keep the industry uplifted and safe.
I think it's incredible that the heart is there. You're an owner, and I've heard you use the word safety. I've known you for, I guess, about 20 years, and I've never known a time where you weren't committed to a safe environment. And I really respect the culture of your organization and so many other people that lead in our industry, because safety does matter. Oftentimes there's a lack of communication. And I think, Brian, that's one of the things that you wanted to help people understand about 222I. There are some areas that may cause some burden on owners, and maybe provide a net benefit. I think one of them we could talk about is Tyler and I had a few towers back 2010, 12, 14 that we had to take down because of installation fault. People had crushed the legs or caused the legs to collapse. And so to keep people safe, we made the decision, working through a process, to take those towers down. We brought that into the industry body, and then you said part of it was we wanted to address some things, and oh my gosh, did the industry overreact.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that a little, the mount to tower interaction and what happened there?
So that actually, mount to tower is actually really something that started back when we were developing Rev H. And when we first started looking at it, the engineering that we put into it, candidly, wasn't really reflective of what we were seeing in the field. So one thing we try to do when we revise the standard, it's not as simple as just what are the theoretical results in engineering provide you. We also try to correlate that with what are the problems we see in the field? When are the problems happening? And then make sure that the recommendations, the equations, whatever the engineering approaches we're recommending are consistent and appropriate for that level of risk. So the equation itself was put together in such a way that whether you're a mount engineer, whether you're a tower engineer, either engineer should be able to apply this equation equally and come to a reasonable conclusion that really protects the tower from the installation of a mount and then the lifespan of a mount on the tower itself. So, and keep you within a acceptable level of risk that's really appropriate for the structure itself.
And that's what we want, right? We want people to make sure that we're not damaging our towers when we're doing installations, and we want to make sure that the reliability continues to increase, right? So as a structure owner, that makes us comfortable knowing as we have people installing new equipment on our towers that we're doing it the right way without damaging the towers.
And I would say, and doing it in a way where it's not overly onerous either. Like I used a comment earlier about or the comment I like to use sometimes, being on the right side or wrong. Well, sometimes being on the right side or wrong doesn't mean being way on the right side or wrong. So the idea right here is to make sure that we put, what we try to put in the standard is what's appropriate for the structure, not what makes us all sleep extremely well at night, which what we do makes us sleep just fine. But, you don't necessarily have to have a factor of safety of 5 when a factor of safety of 2 will do.
Well, and I think it's one of the important pieces, like you just enunciated. You want people installing that right. And the 222 standard really doesn't tell people how to install. So the installation fault can still be present, but that's something really neat about 222I. We really added clarity about the importance of a post-installation inspection. And it came from our understanding that we had people installing stuff wrong or incorrectly. And that's going to create a feedback loop to engineers and designers to do a better job of understanding what needs to be installed. But I think the caution that has to be there is you still need to make sure that you're managing your contract resources, because we're not speaking authoritatively how to install, but we are understanding there's a problem there, and we really lifted up PII in the 222, didn't we?
We did. I think in a lot of ways, something we intentionally did in Rev I, and I think we started this unintentionally in Rev H, is the idea that the standard is not just meant for new infrastructure anymore. It's meant for existing infrastructure and how to manage existing infrastructure. So you see terms like PI, which is in Annex M or N, I forget which one off the top of my head, whether it's maintenance and condition assessments, it's helping you establish how to manage your infrastructure that's already in place, as opposed to treating it as everything's a brand new installation that you're seeing for the first time.
You're always lifting up the ad hoc chairs. I enjoy when you and I get together to talk and the respect you have for the chairs. Mm-hmm. I want to pick on Randy. He's not here, so it's easy to pick on him. Yep. Randy did a heck of a job with the grounding section. And Tyler, I think it's one of the areas for you as a structure owner that's going to make it better and provide clarity, because you work both as a structure owner and an MNO or carrier. I think the grounding section, Randy did a great job, didn't he?
Oh, in fairness to Randy, it's probably one of the least understood or most misunderstood sections of the standard. So a lot of credit goes to Randy for being able to compartmentalize it in a way that was really, I think, should be much more consumable for a tower owner and what you should apply. So.
Yeah, that's great to hear, because as you both of you know, we have had a number of standards and a number of changes to grounding standards. And so having something that's clear and concise for the industry to follow, it's great to hear. And that's really, really important for the industry to have that, where we can standardize and be as efficient as possible with those. We'll make sure that that all the equipment on the towers is grounded properly, and now we have a standard that addresses the tower itself, which is excellent.
Good.
Well, frankly, you don't need us involved in your equipment anyway. You want to manage your equipment. You need us to make sure the structure is good for your equipment, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's the beautiful thing, is the body is hearing what the industry needs. And another area that I think is important is I'd like to talk just a little bit about tornadoes, because you and I deal with a lot of wind events. And we've got incredibly reliable structures. If you go to the TIF website, the Tower Reliability White Paper is a great example of that. But wind is a problem, and tornadoes came to the surface here.
Tornado, this is a new thing. So the American Society of Civil Engineers publishes a standard called Manual 7. And what Manual 7 effectively does is it tells you where snow loads, where wind loads, earthquake loads, ice loads, any number of things that, whether you design a tower or whether you're designing this building, these are the environmental loads you want to design to. Research has been completed over the last 10 years that really started to identify how to design for tornadoes and what makes the wind characteristics unique and whatnot. So whenever the American Society of Civil Engineers Manual 7 provided provisions in for tornadoes, as a tower standard, we had to respond accordingly. Again, this is done, one, because we thought it was appropriate, but two, we also want to stay lockstep with ASC 7 to maintain consistency with the International Building Code, which we've already talked about. So the purpose of the tornado loads here, again, is just to provide another level of resiliency in places where tornadoes are prominent. So for example, where we're here in Raleigh, North Carolina, you're not going to see tornado loads control the design more than conventional wind loads. If you're in Iowa, that may be different, especially if you have a structure that's a risk category 3 or 4. One thing that's important to note, tornado loads aren't applicable right now for risk category 2 structures, which again is true not just for towers, but for all buildings. So it's not unique to towers, but if you're at a place in the Midwest where you want to have a higher level of resiliency, that's part of your plan for your network. We now have to provide a way for you to anticipate that and again, increase your level of resiliency.
That's great, because as a tower owner, we have a lot of structures, Scott, Missouri, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Iowa. We have a significant amount of structures in those areas, and so having all of that information is excellent as we continue to build and develop our programs.
And you get to choose when you apply it. Again, most infrastructure, like most towers in your portfolio are risk category 2. Tornado loads wouldn't apply. If you want to include that in there, you get to make the choice of when you want to rate it up to something higher.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I think a big thing that often gets missed by people is when we talk about risk category, Brian, thanks for the efforts on the white paper on risk category that's out on the TIF website. I think people should look at that because there's a lot of misunderstanding about it. It's based on your intended use and the owner's program for that use. That needs to go into it, and I think that's the elegant balance that's been struck in 222 is we're providing that level of reliability in a very cost-effective and efficient manner with what the standard did. One area I'd like you to speak to a little bit, if you don't mind, is foundations. Tyler's got a lot of guide towers.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times people hear new standard, great, everything just got more expensive. On guide towers, there's a bit of good news.
There is a bit of good news. So, and to your point about whenever you revise the standards, it become more stringent and things become more expensive. In certain instances, that's correct, but not in all instances. And we're certainly conscious of that when we try to create the standard. And certainly the base foundations of guide towers are one of those places where we looked at and said, for almost all existing infrastructure that we see, it is very, very, very rare that we ever see issues with the base of a foundation. So our conclusion in looking at that is that the way we've been practicing engineering and designing factors of safety was probably overly conservative. So how we looked at this is that for any existing structure not designed to Rev I, but that has been in service for a number of years, that you can actually increase the strength of that base foundation because of the performance we've observed over the years of a number of different ones. So this is going to be a case where it may be possible that you might add a carrier to one of your towers, and historically this would result in some kind of upgrade to the base foundation, which never is inexpensive. It's always problematic. In this case, now is a good chance that this will not likely be necessary.
Yeah, that's great to hear, as a tower owner, but also as a carrier, we want to make sure, we are continuously looking for additional co-locators, and, if we can take a reduction in structural loading with that and add carriers for, less where we don't have to do tower mods, that's a win. So
as long as it's appropriate, and that's why we're trying to write the standard and revise the standard in a way that is appropriate. So while you're getting more performance out of the structure, it doesn't mean that your level of risk has been diminished in any way.
Excellent.
And I think what's really neat when we look at that type of stuff is it's in the code. So this is not just a voluntary standard because of what we've done, it's in the International Building Code. It's getting to be about that time. I'd really like to touch one more subject if you don't mind, and that's more accurate information, more accurate data. It's always been accepted where there's more accurate data, but some clarity was needed around computational fluid dynamics and what the heck is it, and why is it important to someone like Tyler? Why is it important to our society?
So computational fluid dynamics is really more commonly referred to as CFD. And effectively, that's using wind tunnels as well as advanced mathematical models to assess how much wind load whenever the wind blows by an object or a structure or a appurtenance, how much that imparts on the structure. Scott, to your point, use of CFD has never been outlawed. It's always been acceptable. It's just never been explicit in the standard. We added that to Rev I mostly just to make it clear, like if you follow appropriate means for establishing your CFD models and your wind loads, that you can use this in place of the recommendations for how we calculate wind loads in the standard. And candidly, in many instances, we found that what we had historically used in the standard is excessively conservative. Again, that's okay. It's good to be on the right side of wrong, but we don't necessarily want to always be way on the right side of wrong.
Well, if I could, Brian, if you look at this as an antenna on a tower, Right now, in the 222 standard, we've got to approach that conservatively if I don't have any more information. So there would be no smooth edges. It would just be a rough rectangle, wouldn't it?
That's right. It would be something that you'd have to look at the handle and then how's the flow rate. And if you have to make the choice between a more aggressive assumption or a more conservative one, you have to use your engineering judgment on that. And most engineers, if you don't know for certain, you want to, again, err on the right side of wrong. So by using CFD, that gets eliminated. You're now able to know exactly what the impact of this is, including your models, and again, really assess your risk appropriately.
It's really great.
At the end of the day, what it means to you is all those antenna manufacturers that have worked so hard to get aerodynamic antennas. Remember the car commercial with the smoke blowing over the car because it was so aerodynamic? Now we're applying that to the structures, which is bringing efficiency to our whole industry. Guys, I really appreciate taking a little bit of time to talk about it. Brian, thanks for your time and leadership for the whole TR-14 group. Tyler, your volunteer hours and support for our industry, I can't thank you enough. I love the debate. I would encourage people to go to the TIF website, look at some of the pans. There's a pan on the changes to 222I. And remember, the 222 standard does have an FAQ section if you need to ask any questions. God bless, guys. Thanks for everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.